360 aspect that a lot of companies are starting to emerge on. We actually are doing pilots internally where we automatically monitor what our competitors are saying about their products and what customers are saying about that, in addition to our brand, to identify what's resonating with the market very, very quickly and respond to it. So I like to wrap up with this slide. It's simplistic and it kind of lays out what we should do as a big data project in most organizations. So we always start with the business priorities and the outcome. We always start by going to the CMO, the VP of HR, and saying, what are the 5 metrics you use every morning to understand success? Start from there. If you start with any other metrics for big data, we're measuring from the wrong point in the organization. We're not measuring from where the executives are looking. Then we're going to go assess technologies. We're going to look at what's out there. Hadoop is the hot thing today. And I feel comfortable saying this next part, being that I kicked off the Hadoop programs at Dell about 3 years ago. Hadoop's not always going to be the cool thing. There will be something new and shiny in 5 years. There always is. So Hadoop's a good technology today. We'll still be using it in 15 years, but we want to make sure we're investing in the right technology for us, given where we are as an organization. Focus on everything, bringing in all of our data from our disparate sources. The value of putting our sales information together with our logistics, together with sentiment about what our customers are saying, hugely valuable, tells us a lot more about what's going on than any individual silo can. And then break down data silos. And this is really easy to make on a slide in a purple box. This is the hard part for most organizations. In every organization, you're going to have individual teams that just simply don't want to share their data. They're going to have compliance reasons that prevent them from doing it. They're going to have security reasons that make them want extra protections in place. There's going to be organizational control issues. You're going to have people that just don't want to give up data because they think it's powerful for them to have it. And this is where companies really manage to take to the next level. The most successful startups over the past 10 years are the ones that don't have the box, this 4th problem. They just don't lock up data. They make it available to everyone in the organization. Because the reality of the situation is that we can lock our data up in a small silo. We can give access to 3 or 4 people, but we don't know if those 3 or 4 people are going to come up with the next great hypotheses about what's good for the company. So making it accessible to everyone increases our chances of somebody coming up with a brilliant idea about what we should do next in the organization. What questions can I answer?
Given that, like you said, the next new shiny thing, I look at big data as like the next big business trend. 5 years ago, it was Lean, Six Sigma,
Yep.
Kaizen, and all that stuff. Are you seeing like the merging of those? Like the guys have been, hey, we've been doing, because that's part of Lean Six Sigma too, is an analysis and data. Are you seeing a merger of the Six Sigma experts now going into the big?
I am. So we go into a lot of organizations and they fall into 1 of 2 buckets. They either have no idea how to get started with the big data market because it's just so drastically different for them, or we go into organizations, like you said, that had a mindset of TQM back in the 90s, Lean Six, 5, 6 years ago, and they look at it and say, we've already been doing this, but what if we brought in this other data set we couldn't have, or this other data that's now being generated? It complements what they've already done. Those tend to be the best organizations for these projects because they're already used to kind of the organizational churn of here's what the data is telling us versus here's how we've always run the business.
With so many competitors in the market, how do you differentiate yourself from Dell, and how do you protect your intellectual property with so many competitors?
So start with the intellectual property. Trademarks and patents are absolutely critical. We spend a lot of time patent protecting our data and our projects and our products so we know what we own in the market and what's unique. So how do we differentiate ourselves? It really comes down to customer interaction. The feedback that we get from customers is they don't like the vendors who show up and just pitch a bunch of product features. They want the vendor that's going to sit down in the consultative style and understand what they're doing and what their value is. The best opportunity to go into an organization and be trusted and valued is to go in and spend an hour with the CIO brainstorming 10 different ways he can use this technology to make his business better. There's a partnership at that point where they see us as an advisor, someone who's willing to throw out ideas, and then work with them on implementation. There's an ongoing debate over when you should start charging for services. And there are older school consultants that are going to say the minute you start talking to them, you should charge them. There are others that are saying, well, actually, trust has to be built outside of a paying relationship. So let's understand how we work together, how we can influence the bottom line, and then we'll talk about what that project is. I tend to lean on the side of let's spend a couple of days to understand their business before we propose anything and before we even get around to charging for consulting services. And that's where the real differentiation comes in. This is a harsh statement. A lot of product people would argue with me. We can spend all day long coming up with great new features and great new products. We have smart people working for us. Every other company does too. I doubt that any company has anyone who's significantly smarter than the next guy down the street. So it's very easy to get leapfrogged when you play that feature after feature, rather than sitting down and making sure the customer realizes you understand their business and are trying to help them with the outcome, rather than, hey, here's my new shiny feature of the week that'll be leapfrogged 2 weeks from now.
Yep. Security issues, how do you fight that?
So security in big data, to say it's a nightmare, I think is an understatement, particularly when we start combining data sets. The market is catching up very slowly. There are companies like Squirrel that are putting in really, really nice new technologies for tagging and encryption that we're getting there, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. Most organizations end up putting these infrastructures off behind huge firewalls, huge silos, just to keep them isolated from the rest of the network. Over time, I think it'll get better as we get better about handling user access, because that's where the problem tends to be. It's what data do we present to the individual versus what do we analyze? The struggle is that most tools today go off of the relational database paradigm, where you either get to see the data or you don't. And it's not that simple in the big data market. I may ask a question of our infrastructure. It's going to analyze data that I don't have access to and provide me an answer, but I can't get to the raw data. And that distinction is new for most security departments. So they have to understand, how do we manage that? How do we deal with that? I wouldn't say there is an answer there. There's a lot of interesting startups in this space. Zetaset, Squirrel came out of the NSA, so that type of work that I think in time it'll get there, but no good answer yet.
Maybe we need to comment about what about the privacy issue?
Yep. Privacy is, in my mind, the harder challenge than security. Security you can usually resolve with policies, procedures, encrypted disks. Privacy is a personal feeling in most cases. Does someone feel violated? There's very few countries that actually have privacy laws. The EU does, they've got clear standards. We in the US, at the end of the day, don't. There's really no legal definition of privacy in the United States. So it's what your customers are comfortable and used to. And it's important that you ask them and only go that far and no further. University of Kentucky is a good example. So University of Kentucky has put in a system to monitor student retention. It's terrible for students to start a college course and not finish. There's very few good reasons for that to happen. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, it's an impact on society. So University of Kentucky has gotten very conscious about how they monitor students and engage with students that look like they may be ready to drop out, they may be struggling in courses. As part of that, they went and asked the students permission. Can we monitor your Twitter account? Can we monitor your Facebook account? And the students who said no are not part of the program. They were very conscious about that because they did not want to end up in a situation where they were making the students feel uncomfortable about how they were being monitored in the education space. So privacy, I think, is one of those things that's going to evolve over time. At some point, I'd like to believe that we get to a line where people say, this is clearly where we're comfortable. I think it's going to continue to be what we've seen for the past 4 or 5 years. A company does something, people push back and say, whoa, that's inappropriate, and then companies pull back a little bit. Target's a good example. The example about 2 years ago where they mistakenly notified a girl's parents that she was pregnant because of buying patterns. They don't do that anymore. They've realized they've crossed a line, they pulled back. And I think we're going to see that give and take here for a while until lines get settled on what's appropriate. Yeah, absolutely. They'll continue to push because companies want to know what their customers are doing at the end of the day. They want as much information as possible. Most of us are pretty open about what we share. We may not realize that most of us are pretty open. If we don't want to, we don't have to. There's consequences for that. Most of the people I interact with now, it's on Facebook Messenger. If you had asked me a year ago how I interact with people, it wouldn't have been in the top 5 methods, but it's become the dominant standard, and that continues to happen. People like that. They like the flexibility provided by these new technologies. They're willing to trade their data for it in most cases. We're never going to go back to where we were 10 years ago. Yep.
Yeah, from a cultural perspective, we had an assignment to kind of research the big data topic, and I read a lot of things where the Asian cultures are much more advanced in terms of analytics. Is Dell doing anything to get those markets, or do they primarily, like the Japanese companies, they kind of stick with that? Analytics companies over there, you guys?
So we have offerings there. The standard tends to be language for the tools. A lot of our tools are not translated to Japanese. A lot of them were just now getting translated to Chinese. It has to do with market size when we get there. So absolutely, when it comes to analytics and big data, the dominant markets are US, North America. EMEA is emerging very rapidly. Australia is trying to get up. Asia has their own kind of subset of companies that are doing technology there and doing it very well. Yet again, another place where privacy is very different just because of government intervention, government interaction. So we have business there. A lot of our business intelligence tools just recently got launched in China in local languages. So we're getting there. Just very different markets to handle.
You mentioned one of the issues with the inputs is the skills that people have and the significant investments companies would need to make to either bring their current employees up to speed, or do you think that companies are going to start hiring a new generation of, I guess students, or do you think they're going to invest in their current staff and try to bring, how would a company do that?
Most companies end up doing both. The really strategic companies partner with local universities because they realize they need an influx of new blood. Facebook has their smart people go present at Stanford all the time and try to get their classes up to par. We've been working on a project with Florida State recently to define a curriculum for a couple of big data-like courses they're going to provide. So a lot of the more forward-looking companies realize they need to influence what's going on in the universities, so that people come out of college with the right skills and they can hire them. Companies also realize they have a large number of employees that fall into that 30 to 40 bracket, so they're not going to retire anytime soon, and they relentlessly work on training those individuals. So it ends up becoming this balance of training along with making sure the next generation of people come out with the right skills. Companies struggle with this because investment in employee skills has gone down quite dramatically over the past 15 or 20 years. Companies struggle with what's the right amount to invest. What's the right way to balance risk of investing a bunch of money in a guy that he then leaves. And on the same side, if he doesn't have the skills because we didn't pay for them, do we want him sitting around at the desk doing nothing? It's a tough trade-off. Yep.
So when you go to different industries, how do you fill the domain gap?
So we have people on staff that have expertise in a fair amount of industries. So my background tends to be dominantly federal. I worked for one of the national laboratories for a long time, consulted in that space. So I've got expertise in that market, so I tend to get pulled into federal deals. When it comes to marketing, we do a rotation program inside Dell. Most people at Dell don't stay in the same job for more than about 2.5 years. People bounce around. One of the common paths is a lot of our in-house marketing people tend to move to Dell services as consultants. So when we go engage with customers in the marketing analytics space, we can actually pull someone that used to do it in-house so they can speak the right language. The healthcare space is a good example. We have at least 5 MDs on staff in our healthcare consulting team. So when we go in to advise a hospital on the best way to implement new technologies to manage their patient records, it's not me, a technologist, talking to them. It's an actual MD that used to practice. So it's someone talking at their level. We have experts across financial services. We have manufacturing folks. So we try to bring in somebody who can speak their language. It goes much further than bits and bytes type technologists.
One more question. Yep. I have a technology background. When you mentioned that one of the challenges with big data is processing unstructured data, can you recommend some kind of technologies which I can learn to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the Dell technologies.